There is, of course, a tragedy in my story, which is the torture and murder of my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. But there is some redemption in my story as well, which is that in his name we got a law passed which punishes types of people who killed him and do other similar types of abuses. And the Magnitsky Act, which is named after Sergei, now exists in 35 countries, and it doesn't just apply to Russian human rights violators. It applies to Chinese, Iranian, Venezuelan, and all sorts of other other bad actors in the world, and it gives victims some hope that there is some possibility of justice in a world where there was not before. Well, I never imagined that the Magnitsky Act would ever pass anywhere. To get a U.S. law passed is like 1 in a million, and to get the same law passed in 35 countries is unprecedented. And so we have created history. I think people will look back 50 years from now at the Magnitsky Act, and people will use it. People may not even know the story of where it came from, but we've changed the way that human rights abuses are dealt with. We've changed human rights law, and we've created some type of recourse. And I've always just been operating in the moment, never anticipating that we'd have success, and just pushing ahead. And it took many years for most countries to pass the Magnitsky Act, and I never stopped. Now we have something which everybody could use. One of the most important people who I worked with on the campaign for justice for Sergei Magnitsky was a historian, a Russian-British historian named Vladimir Kara-Murza. And when I went to visit different lawmaking bodies to testify about what happened to Sergei, he would testify using all the historical examples about how important this was to contain and to stop the Putin regime. And so history, or I should say a very talented and charismatic historian, played a big role in our campaign. We're absolutely repeating history completely and absolutely. The appeasement that Neville Chamberlain expressed towards Nazi Germany is the same appeasement that British, American, German governments tried to use to stop Putin. The only thing that works with dictators is a boot on the throat. So we've missed that lesson for sure, and here we are now going into what could end up, if it goes wrong, into another world war. It's heartbreaking, and the thing about it is that the Russian people, for the most part, are okay. There's many good people there. I'm married to a Russian. I've got a bunch of Russian employees from back in the Russian days are still with me, and they're the most loyal, capable, smart, hardworking, earnest people I've ever come across. It's an occupied country. It's occupied by criminals, and then there's enough criminals occupying it to keep and to terrorize a vast majority of people who don't want this. Putin says that everyone supports his war. They don't support his war. We saw it with Prigozhin on his march. That they don't like Putin. And of course, there's some horrible, tragic people over there, and Putin has whipped people into a nationalist frenzy. But down below that, there's just a lot of regular people that just wish it would go back to normal, not kill Ukrainians. Well, I've never actually met Putin in person, but he became my number one adversary, and I think I became his number one adversary. And to watch his reactions to all the things that I did over a period of time, and to watch his level of anger and the retaliation was horrifying. And just truly, it's terror in the most personal way for me. He's a true psychopath. He has no empathy. His heart doesn't start beating faster when people are being killed in front of him. He's just pure. Everybody is just an object towards his own narrow personal goals. The main contribution that I can make to Ukraine is that since I've spent the last 13 years going around the world convincing governments and parliaments to pass laws to freeze assets, we're now in a situation where we've frozen some of those assets. The West has frozen $350 billion of Russian central bank reserves. It seems obvious and sort of the only possible thing to confiscate those assets that have been frozen and to send them to Ukraine for their rebuilding and reconstruction. And so a big part of my efforts now are to try to help Ukraine get hold of those assets, which means changing some laws and getting parliamentarians and governments to sort of move that extra step. But since I've created all these networks and all these relationships and all this legal technology, it seems like not a big stretch to help the Ukrainians through that. And I think that next to supplying weapons, that's the second most important thing we can do for Ukraine, is to give them the cash they need to rebuild. Well, now I've got one of my closest colleagues, Vladimir Kara-Murza, the historian who helped me pass the Magnitsky Act, is in prison. He's now not just facing, but sentenced to 25 years in jail for treason. And so my goal is to get him out of prison. In the name of Sergei Magnitsky, we want to use the Magnitsky Act to help other victims, not just in Russia, but all over the world, working with victims, Uyghurs from China, Iranians who have been terrorized by their regime, the Rohingya people in Myanmar, Venezuelans, all sorts of people who've been targeted by their dictators, and I have an ability to help people like that, and I am.